Greetings and welcome back to 303 Junior English. We turn now to page 1065, 1066, and the great Robert Hayden. We'll start with dates on 1065, 1913 to 1980. We're going to be looking at his poem, Frederick Douglass. Of course, we know about Frederick Douglass from our earlier study in Junior English, the great emancipated slave who ultimately would write about his experiences of being a slave, huge voice of the abolitionist movement. Robert Hayden, an important poet who will celebrate this, the life of Frederick Douglass. Let's learn a little bit about Hayden. Born in Detroit, Robert Hayden had a difficult childhood. He faced poverty, coped with emotional difficulties of an unstable family, struggled with extreme nearsightedness. Though his poor vision prevented him from playing sports, it did not stop him from reading. Hayden devoted his days to books, developing an appreciation for the transformative qualities of literature. I'll pause for a moment and just tell you that this is similar to what we'll say in your senior year about John Keats, who had bad health, and so he was unable as a young boy to be involved in sports and stuff, but he had a strong mind, and so he became a fan of books and writing, as Hayden did. Our first heading, Experience, Research, and Art. Hayden attended Detroit City College, now Wayne State University. In 1936, he joined the Federal Writers Project, researching African American history and folk culture. The depth of historical awareness he gained from his research contributed to the poetry and artistry of his stuff. As a young, politically active writer in the 1930s, he protested against the social and economic conditions of African Americans and what he saw as the nation's inadequate care of the poor. Hayden was an extremely versatile writer who used a variety of poetic forms and techniques. While working towards his master's degree, he studied under W.H. Auden, who we already met, the unknown citizen, you'll maybe remember his poem, who influenced Hayden's choices of form and technique. Final heading, Publications and Honors. During his career, Hayden published several collections of poetry, including A Ballad of Remembrance, 1962, which won the grand prize for poetry at the First World Festival for Negro Arts in 1966. From 1976 to 1978, Hayden served as consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress, a position later known as Poet Laureate. So let's just say it out loud for your notes. Hayden will be considered one of America's greatest poets as Poet Laureate. Although Hayden sought to undo racial stereotypes and tell a truthful version of his people's history, he did not believe that race should define a poet. Instead, he believed that identity serves as a starting point from which to offer insights that transcend race and speak to all people. Notice the quote on 1065, "My poetry is a way of coming to grips with reality, a way of discovery and definition." I love that idea that if you want to try and figure out life, one way to do it is to write about it. All art is in some ways an attempt to try to explain the experiences that the artist is kind of having or going through. All right, on 1067, we're going to turn now to Frederick Douglass, and background information here. Of course, Frederick Douglass, who we've met already, there his dates are 1870 to 1895, was a leading abolitionist during the 19th century, right? And of course, we have the Douglass autobiography information already provided for us on pages 520 to 527. We can also look at, of course, Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem on 636 that we've already done called Douglass. And both of those, we have lectures posted on learnstrong.net for you if you're interested in seeing those. Let's take a look now at the Frederick Douglass poem. At the Robert Hayden poem, Frederick Douglass. Let's read together. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, distal, systole, reflex action, when it is finally one, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians, this man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none haunted, alien, this man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues, rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing. Now let's pause for a moment and count lines. And let's start at 2b. We love to start with structure. One of the things that we're always looking at is how is a work of art constructed? Notice number of lines tell you that this is a 14-line offering. So right away we want to put it in our notes, right? This is what do we call a 14-line offering? Does anybody remember? What do we call it? Right, a sonnet. Very good. So we're now working with a sonnet by Robert Hayden. Let's point out that there is some sense of meter. When it is truly instinct, brain matter, distal, systole. Then the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians. Then the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians. You got some internal rhyme happening here, or rhythm happening. Let's turn now to what exactly this poem is. Let's write it down at level 1 and call it what it is. You can also put this at 2b if you want to. This is what we call a tribute poem. What does that mean? Well, we have someone writing a poem of tribute, of respect. And of course, it's there in the title, Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist voice. Notice that the poem begins the way, for example, we will have Shakespeare poems and John Keats sonnets. They love this when, then construction. We begin with the word when. When it is finally ours. What is finally ours? This freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing. Freedom. Needful to man as air. Usable as earth. First when. Put it in your own words. I'm teaching you how to read. Hey, let me just pause for a moment and remind you. I am very, very happy that we get to learn something about writers and poets like Hayden. I'm very happy that by the end of our time together in junior English, you're going to know a lot of poets and writers, and you're going to know something about what they wrote. No question, I'm happy about that. But that is not our first priority. Our first priority, just to remind, I know I've said this many times in 303 to you, but just to remind, I'm teaching you how to read. How to read. So we are looking now at level 1. We read a couple of lines. We put it now in our own words, simply summarizing what did we just read. Notice the first when. I told you, this is a sonnet constructed in a when, then construction. So let's look at it, the first when. When freedom is finally ours. About freedom, he says, it's so unbelievably necessary. It's the thing that's most important to us. Of course, there's a famous saying, of all the things a fish can know, the one thing a fish can never know is water. Think about that. Of all the things a fish can know, the one thing a fish can never know is water. Why? Because the fish is completely submerged in water. It's everything to the fish. Therefore, the fish can't know about water. The only way a fish could know about water is to have some kind of experience outside of water, which is, of course, for a fish, what? Death. Of all the things a man can know, the one thing a man can never know, the one thing a woman can never know is freedom. It's the air we breathe. It's what makes us who we are. It's usable as earth. It belongs to everybody. And yet, notice the irony, when it is finally ours. Now obviously let's pause at level 1 and ask, who is ours? And of course we'll understand that Hayden is speaking for, could be for African Americans, could be for all Americans, because if there's one person in our country who lacks full freedom, all of us lack full freedom. Second when it belongs at last to all. The next when it is truly instinct, brain matter. And then of course the distal and systole, the normal rhythmic dilation or opening of the heart. The systole, of course, is the normal rhythmic closing of the heart. It's a brilliant word picture, isn't it? The way that the heart opens to allow blood in and then pumps it shut to let blood out. That's what freedom is to each of us without realizing it. It's our lifeblood. Reflex action, when freedom finally becomes reflex action. when it is finally won, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians who love to talk about something without it actually happening. When all of that happens, line 7, when we finally get our freedom, this man, notice the repetition, this Douglas, notice he just uses the last name, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien. Line 10. This man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Put it at level 1. What have you just read? When finally every American is fully free, who will be most remembered? Frederick Douglass. As one of my juniors once pointed out, there's a nasty irony here, Mr. McGee. Before I took your class, sorry, didn't know who Frederick Douglass was. Now that I know who he is, I'm like, man, so important in the history of America. If you don't know the name of Frederick Douglass, so much for you is lost in your American experience of what it means to be an American. Because you have freedom that is only made possible because of people like Frederick Douglass. He'll be remembered. That's the promise. But then something interesting happens at line 11. Pay attention to it with me. Oh, he's not going to be remembered with statues, rhetoric, not with legends and poems. Note the irony, of course, he's writing a poem about him. And wreaths of bronze alone. He'll be remembered, but that's not the primary reason. He'll be remembered with the lives grown out of his life. And we immediately think about the Rothke poem that we were working with before, Cuttings and Cuttings Later. How you're a product, as a culture, you're a product of all of these amazing people who came before you. I've had juniors that say, I don't know if shame is the right word, but I'll use it. I'm kind of ashamed that I'm 17 years old and I didn't know so many of these important people in the history of my country who make me who I am, who give me the opportunity to be who I am. I don't even know who these people are. It's kind of sad. But I'm happy I know now. I'm happy I know now. The lives that have grown out of Frederick Douglass's life, fleshing his dream, we think immediately at level 3A of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, of the beautiful, needful thing. Notice what is missing in the final line. Did you see it? It's like a puzzle, right? What's missing in the final line? Go back to the opening 3 lines. What does he call freedom? Beautiful, needful. What's missing? Terrible. Which is interesting. What does it mean to say that freedom is a terrible thing? Because, of course, when you have the freedom to do what you want, like own a firearm, for example, you have the freedom to misuse that firearm, don't you? Right? But that's the essence of freedom. When we live in a country that is free, then we have to live with the responsibilities of that freedom as well. And sometimes those responsibilities can have terrible repercussions, no question. All of those complexities are a part of a democracy. That's what makes America great, is that we embrace the complexities of our political existence, don't we? Right? All right, let's jot down now at 2A. What are we going to say? What does this poem actually mean? Well, a couple of things right away. One, the brilliance of this poem is to remind you of how important freedom is and how much, let's write it down, we take our freedom for granted. We really do. We take our freedom so regularly for granted. Think about all of the blessings of your life that you take for granted. School. What do you mean school? School sucks. No. Remember what Frederick Douglass says. Slavery is not about chains. Slavery is about the mind. In an earlier lecture, you'll maybe remember that I said it about Frederick Douglass. Funny thing about the South in the pre-Civil War, there was not one law against teaching your mule how to read. Not one. There wasn't one law against teaching your horse how to read. What are you talking about? Mules can't read. Horses can't read. Well, there were rules against teaching your slaves how to read. Don't try and make the argument that those slaveholders of the South thought of their black slaves as animals. No, they did not. There were no laws against teaching your animals how to read. Those laws prove those slave owners knew teaching your slaves how to read is a dangerous thing. Why? Why? Because you can keep a slave in chains and he will stay in chains. But if you give a slave the opportunity to learn to read, he can think. And once he or she can think, well, Frederick Douglass said it. Once he learned how to read, and once he read the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Frederick Douglass asked the obvious question, how can a nation that holds that as its sacred document allow for slavery? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Slavery is ignorance. So our first major theme here is freedom is about recognizing what we have that we take so often for granted. The joys of living in a safe environment. The joys of living in a country where we have laws. We are a nation of laws. It's a tremendous gift. And yet we overlook it. First major message. Second major message. The only way you have freedoms is because of great men and women who have lived. Even though tragically we're so often ignorant or unaware of who those people were. And we need to recognize and support and respect them. Finally, number 3, this poem suggests we have to pay attention. We have to stand up and pay attention and show respect to the people who have come before us, who have given us what we have, who have given us the abilities of our freedoms and the like. I think I've said it to you before. If we lack, as your generation does often said of you, if you lack patriotism, it is not your fault. It is not your fault. It is the fault of an older generation that hasn't given you enough reason to be patriotic. Reading a text like this cannot help you but be patriotic. If you have any sense of it at all, if you love freedom at all, if you have ever stood in front of an authority figure and said, "Don't tell me what to do," you love freedom. You love freedom. And if you love the right to be able to say to an authority figure, "Don't tell me what to do," you owe respect to Frederick Douglass. Thank you, Robert Hayden, for reminding us of this. Of course, if we jump to 2B really quickly, we're obviously we're looking at a sonnet. It's an amazing thing that Hayden will play the game of closed form, a sonnet, but he's going to write a really compelling poem that makes us think. Of course, we also have powerful word pictures here. What is your favorite one? Some of you will love that release of blood, the release and the squeezing together of the muscles of the heart, that distal-systole movement. To say that's what freedom is, many have argued that's what a democracy is, that give and that take. It's wonderful that he says about Frederick Douglass, he was superb in love and logic. Wow, what a great line. Love and logic. Of course, if you're a YouTube fan at 3A, you know all about this love and logic. Of course, that's an interesting idea. There's 2 parts to who you are. There's your emotional part, that is to say the heart, emotions. And then there's the mind, logic, the rational. And you are both of those in union, we would hope. Notice Frederick Douglass having both of those. Finally, let's jump to 3A. If texts mean anything, they mean something because we can relate to them. Remember, we define learning as the ability to connect or relate new information to old information. So let's ask about it. What is for you your greatest text about freedom? I'm sometimes asking this, and juniors say, wow, I guess I really haven't thought about that. Of all the songs in your playlist, what is your favorite song about freedom? Maybe that's the wrong way to ask it. What is your favorite song about "Don't Tell Me What to Do"? What is your favorite "Don't Tell Me What to Do" song? What is your favorite movie that shows a hero who fights against all odds for what he or she believes in to be right? What's your favorite video game hero who stands up to everyone and says, "Don't tell me what to do, I'm going to do this because I think it's right"? The minute that you stand up against what's wrong, you are paying tribute to Frederick Douglass and to the many great Americans like him. Finally, of course, 3B, we have to relate this to ourselves personally. What is your view about freedom? Do you take it for granted? Another question, who are the Frederick Douglasses of your life? We asked in an earlier lecture on Worn Path, Eudora Welty's classic, Worn Path, who are the Phoenix Jacksons in your life? Who are the people in your life who make you who you are, who have allowed you to be who you are? And of course, we maybe finish by saying, why is it the case that we so regularly have not paid proper respect and tribute to the great Americans who came before? It's probably time as juniors that we begin to do that. Well, there you go, Robert Hayden's classic, Frederick Douglass. Thank you.